He feels your presence even in your absence. He thinks about you in the quiet moments, in the spaces between distractions, in the depth of the night when the world slows down and he is left alone with the truth. He craves you. And yet he does nothing. No call, no message, no effort. Why? Because desire is not the same as courage. Because craving someone and choosing them are two entirely different things. Some people run from what they want most, terrified of the depth of what they feel. Others hold back, waiting for validation, for the certainty that you'll always be there, lingering in the background, waiting. But here's the truth. You are not something to be half-loved, to be longed for in silence but never claimed in the light. If he cannot step forward, let him stay behind. Because the kind of love you deserve is not one that hides. It is one that stands boldly, unafraid, choosing you every single day. He wants you. There's no doubt about that. You live in his mind, in the quiet moments between distractions, in the space between his thoughts and his unspoken words. He replays memories of you, wonders what you're doing, imagines what it would be like if things were different. He craves your presence, your energy, the way you make him feel. And yet, he doesn't call. He doesn't text. He doesn't reach for you the way you deserve. Because desire is not the same as courage. It's easy to want someone from a distance. It's easy to long for them in silence, to feel their absence but do nothing about it. True desire isn't just about craving, it's about choosing. And choosing requires effort, action, responsibility. That's where he falls short. But craving you is safe. But stepping forward, risking rejection, showing up in the way you deserve, that demands a level of emotional strength he may not have. Some men don't reach out, not because they don't care, but because caring too much terrifies them. The depth of their feelings makes them uneasy. They are comfortable in relationships that remain on the surface, where emotions don't demand too much from them. But you are different. You demand something real, something raw. You are not someone who can be half-loved or kept at arm's length. And that scares him. People fear what they don't understand. And sometimes they fear the ones who make them feel the most. It's easier to suppress emotions than to face them. He convinces himself that if he stays away, if he doesn't reach out, the feelings will fade, that time will dull the connection, that ignoring you will make it easier. But deep down, he knows he's only lying to himself. Because you are not someone who is easily forgotten. But here's what you need to understand. His struggle is not yours to fix. His fears are not yours to soothe. You are not responsible for teaching someone how to be ready for you. Love should never have to beg to be chosen. You shouldn't have to wait for someone to gather the courage to do what they should have done the moment they realized your worth. And yet, there's a part of you that wonders. If he wants you this much, if he feels this deeply, then why can't he just reach out? Why is he willing to stay in the shadows instead of stepping into the light? The truth is, wanting something and believing you are capable of having it are two different things. Some men don't feel worthy of the love they desire. They crave it, but convince themselves they can't handle it. And so, they self-sabotage, they retreat, they let their fear win. But you are not here to be someone's almost. You are not here to be longed for in silence but never claimed in reality. You deserve a love that is bold, that is fearless, that doesn't hesitate when it sees you standing right in front of it. So, stop questioning why he doesn't call. Stop replaying scenarios in your mind, wondering if he misses you, if he regrets it, if he's thinking about you right now. Because the real question is, why would you ever settle for someone who lets fear keep them from you? Why would you wait for someone to gather the courage to love you when there are people in this world who would stand in the fire just for the chance to be with you? Love doesn't hesitate. It doesn't sit in silence while the person it wants walks away. It doesn't let pride, fear, or ego stand in the way of something real. If he wanted to, he would. And if he can't, then he was never meant for the version of you that is growing, evolving, and becoming. Because the love you are meant for, the kind that moves mountains, the kind that meets you where you are without hesitation, that love will never need to find the courage to reach out. It will simply choose you again and again. Without question, he feels it, every inch of the distance between you. He knows exactly what he's lost. The moments, the connection, the way you made him feel, understood without him ever having to say a word. He craves it, maybe even more than he's willing to admit to himself. But he still won't reach out, not because he doesn't want to, but because wanting and acting are two different things. Because some men fear depth more than they fear absence. It's not that he doesn't miss you. It's that missing you is easier than facing what having you would demand from him. Deep, real connections require vulnerability. They require a level of emotional courage that not everyone possesses. And for someone like him, the idea of surrendering to something bigger than himself, of stepping into a love that requires honesty, consistency, and openness, it's terrifying. So he does what he knows best. He pulls back. He chooses silence over uncertainty. He convinces himself that if he stays away, he can control what he feels. That if he keeps you at a distance, he won't have to risk exposing his fears, his flaws, his weaknesses, because to be with someone like you, to love you the way you deserve, he would have to let his walls down. And for a man who has spent his entire life building those walls, that is not an easy thing to do. You see, people like him don't run because they don't care. They run because they care too much. Because what they feel for you is too intense, too consuming, too real. And real love? It shakes you. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you may not be ready to face. It demands that you show up as you are, without pretense, without the safety of emotional distance. And that's what he's avoiding, not you, but the version of himself he would have to become in order to love you the way you deserve. Because deep love requires accountability. It asks hard questions. Are you ready to show up fully? Are you willing to unlearn your fears, to grow, to evolve? And not everyone is ready for those answers. But here's what you need to remember. You are not responsible for someone else's emotional growth. You cannot force someone to be ready for the love they claim to want. And more importantly, you should never have to convince someone to meet you where you are. If he fears depth, if he chooses to stay in the shallow waters of life, rather than dive into the unknown with you, then let him. Because the love you deserve will not be found in a man who hesitates, who overthinks, who lets fear dictate his choices. Real love is not about waiting for someone to gather the courage to love you. It's about finding someone who doesn't need to think twice. Someone who sees you, who understands what you bring to their life and who embraces it wholeheartedly. Not with reluctance, not with hesitation, but with certainty. So let him sit in his silence. Let him battle his own fears. Let him learn in his own time what he lost when he chose comfort over courage. But don't you dare make yourself small waiting for him to catch up. Don't soften your love, your intensity, your depth just to make it easier for someone else to hold on to you. Because the right person, they won't just crave you in the shadows. They will stand beside you in the light. They won't fear the depth of what you offer. They will dive into it, unafraid, ready. And that kind of love, that is the only kind worth waiting for. Silence is never just silence. It's a message, a choice, a form of control wrapped in uncertainty. When he doesn't reach out, when he lets the space between you grow, it's not always because he's moved on. Sometimes it's because he wants to see if you will break first, if you will chase, if you will shrink yourself to fit into the small space he's left open for you. This is not love. This is power. A subtle, unspoken game where distance becomes a tool to test your loyalty, your patience, your willingness to stay attached even when he refuses to show up. He doesn't have to speak, doesn't have to explain, doesn't have to take accountability, because his silence does all the work for him. It keeps you wondering, it keeps you waiting. It keeps you emotionally invested in someone who has made no real effort to hold on to you. And yet you feel the pull. the need to justify, to decode, to convince yourself that maybe he's just struggling, maybe he just needs time, maybe if you give him space, he'll come back. But here's the truth. When a man truly wants you, he does not gamble with your feelings. He does not create confusion where clarity should exist. He does not withhold words and affection as a way to keep you tethered. Silence is an illusion of power, a way for someone to maintain control without ever having to claim responsibility. And the cruelest part? It works. It keeps you engaged in a one-sided connection where you are always the one seeking answers, the one reaching out, the one wondering what went wrong. It tricks you into believing that the love you felt was real, even when the actions never match the words. But love is not a test. Love does not ask you to prove your worth by enduring absence, by accepting less, by waiting in the shadows while he decides when or if he will return. Real love is presence. It is consistency. It is choosing someone in both the easy moments and the difficult ones, not just when it's convenient or comfortable. So stop romanticizing his silence. Stop mistaking his hesitation for depth. Stop thinking that the more patient you are, the more likely he is to come back. Because the hard truth is, if he wanted to, he would. And if he's using distance as a way to manipulate the dynamic between you, then he doesn't deserve the place you've given him in your heart. When you stop reacting to his silence, when you no longer respond to the unspoken cues meant to keep you hooked, you shift the power. You reclaim your energy, your time, your self-worth, and suddenly the dynamic changes. He realizes you are no longer waiting, that the space he created is no longer something you fear, it's something you've embraced. And that is the moment he will start to feel the loss. Because nothing unsettles a man more than a woman who refuses to be played with. Nothing shakes him more than realizing the silence that once kept you hoping has now set you free. So let him wonder. Let him feel your absence the way you once felt his. Let him sit in the silence he created and watch how quickly it turns from power into regret. And while he does, you will move forward. Not waiting, not wishing, not looking back, but stepping fully into the life that was always meant for you. Because the one who truly sees you, who values you, who knows your worth, he won't need silence to understand what he stands to lose. He will never risk losing you in the first place. There comes a point when you have to stop analyzing, stop waiting, stop wondering why he hasn't reached out. You have to stop looking for meaning in his absence and start finding meaning in your own presence. Because the truth is, his silence is not an unanswered question. It's an answer you may not want to accept. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows you're thinking about him, questioning everything, playing back moments in your mind, searching for the turning point where things changed. He knows that every time you check your phone, every time you replay the last conversation, every time you wonder if he'll ever come back, he still has a hold on you. And that's the part no one likes to admit. Sometimes the silence isn't accidental. Sometimes it's deliberate. A way to keep you emotionally tethered without ever having to fully commit. But here's what you need to realize. You are not an option waiting to be chosen. You are not someone who should have to sit in uncertainty, hoping that one day he will decide you're worth the effort. Love isn't a game of waiting to see who cares less, who holds out longer, who can maintain the upper hand. Love is a choice. And if he's not choosing you, then what are you really holding on to? Maybe he does miss you. Maybe late at night he thinks about calling you. Maybe he even types out a message and then deletes it. But the difference between someone who truly values you and someone who just enjoys the idea of you is action. A man who genuinely wants to be in your life will show up, not through breadcrumbs, not through occasional check-ins, not through mixed signals that leave you doubting yourself, but through consistency, through presence, through effort. The more you invest in understanding why he hasn't reached out, the less energy you have to focus on yourself. And the real tragedy isn't that he's gone. It's that you've started to forget who you were before he made you question your worth. It's that you've put your own growth on pause, waiting for someone who doesn't even have the courage to meet you where you are. But here's the beautiful thing. The moment you stop waiting, you reclaim your power. You stop letting his absence define your sense of value. You stop chasing closure from someone who was never capable of giving it. You stop looking for explanations that won't change the reality in front of you. And in that moment, something shifts. Because nothing is more powerful than a woman who stops needing external validation to feel whole. Nothing is more magnetic than someone who refuses to settle for half love, for almosts, for unanswered texts and empty promises. And when you finally step back, when you finally redirect your focus inward, something remarkable happens. He feels it. He feels the moment you stop waiting. He notices when you no longer react, when you no longer check for updates, when you are no longer emotionally accessible the way you once were. He realizes that the safety net he assumed would always be there, the reassurance that you would always be waiting, is gone. And that's when the regret sets in. Not because he suddenly understands your worth, but because he realizes he took for granted something rare, something irreplaceable. But by then it's too late. Because you have already chosen yourself. You have already learned that real love doesn't leave you in limbo. That someone who genuinely cares will never make you question whether they do. That the kind of love you deserve is not found in someone who hesitates, but in someone who knows, without a doubt, that you are the person they want to stand beside. So let him wonder, let him feel the loss, let him sit in the silence he created, and let that silence be his own lesson to learn. But as for you, your lesson is different. Yours is about knowing when to walk away, when to close the door, when to stop asking for something that should have been given freely. And the moment you do, you will realize something profound. The one who is truly meant for you will never need to be chased. He will never need silence to understand your value. He will never need distance to appreciate your presence. And that kind of love, that is the only kind worth waiting for. There is a moment when everything shifts, not because he reached out, not because you finally got the closure you thought you needed, but because you decided that your life, your energy, your peace are worth more than waiting for someone else's realization. You see, for so long, you've been caught in the loop of what ifs. What if he changes? What if he finally understands what he lost? What if one day he comes back and tells you he was wrong? But let's be honest. Do you really want a love that has to be lost before it's valued? Do you really want someone who only recognizes your worth once you've walked away? That is not love. That is convenience. That is ego. That is someone who only appreciates the sun when the night gets too cold. And you are not the sun for someone who refuses to step into your light. There's a certain power in letting go, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. It's the moment you stop replaying the conversations in your head. It's when you stop seeking validation from someone who couldn't even offer you consistency. It's when you wake up and realize that love isn't meant to be a guessing game. If you have to keep questioning whether someone wants you, you already have your answer. You were never meant to be someone's maybe. You were never meant to exist in a space where your worth is up for debate. And yet we live in a world that romanticizes the struggle, the idea that if you wait long enough, endure enough, prove yourself enough, then maybe, just maybe, you'll be chosen. But love is not about endurance. It is not about suffering in silence until someone decides they are finally ready to give you what you deserve. Real love does not require waiting in the shadows. It does not demand patience for someone who isn't even willing to meet you halfway. And it certainly does not thrive in the spaces where you are constantly forced to shrink yourself just to fit into someone else's comfort zone. But here's where everything changes. The moment you decide to stop waiting. The moment you realize that love should never be about convincing someone to see your value. The moment you recognize that the love you seek, the deep, fulfilling, undeniable kind of love, is first and foremost the love you give yourself. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing. You stop wondering when or if he'll reach out. You stop caring about the why behind his silence, because at the end of the day, his reasons are not your responsibility. What is your responsibility? The way you show up for yourself, the way you choose to move forward without carrying the weight of someone else's indecision. And the moment you do that, the universe shifts. Suddenly, you're no longer just existing in the space of someone else's uncertainty. You are reclaiming your own power. You are no longer waiting for love to find you. Because you're too busy building a life so full, so vibrant, so deeply fulfilling, that love becomes a natural extension of who you are. Not something you chase, but something that meets you exactly where you are. And that's when everything comes full circle. Because the moment he realizes you are no longer waiting, the moment he senses that his absence no longer holds power over you, that is when he will feel the loss. That is when he will reach out, not because he suddenly changed, but because he never expected you to stop waiting. But by then you will have already learned the most valuable lesson of all. Love is not about who comes back. It is about who never leaves in the first place. So let him feel the emptiness of the space he created. Let him sit in the silence he once used as a tool. But as for you, you will be too busy living, growing, thrive, because the love that is truly meant for you will never have to be chased. It will meet you exactly where you are, without hesitation, without fear, without conditions. And that kind of love, that's the only kind worth holding on to.